Oh, this is a beautiful church, my heavens. I think what we're talking about today is maybe a prelude to what might occur in terms of developing a feasibility study for the church and how it...
I think in the back.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think today will be a prelude for what might happen with respect to doing a feasibility study, to try to study some of the needs and solutions for your next step. Sometimes when architects talk, we tend to think that everyone knows what we're talking about. And quite frankly, I think when we talk about a feasibility study, maybe a little bit of background and preparation might be desirable so that you know what is being done, what we're thinking about, and what you have in the end when we do a feasibility study. A lot of clients come to us asking, we have a project, we need classrooms, we're thinking of buying a building in Bellefonte, and we want to renovate it, and what are we getting into? What are the things that are going to make us stumble if we go past a certain area? What's it going to cost? Are there options for phasing and all these kind of issues? And so what we do is put together a small team of professionals, of which our office is part of, to look at that study. Sometimes it's a structural engineer. Other times I will hire a code consultant. For any of those in this room that know code, sometimes they can be interesting to work with. And also we hire a civil engineer who typically looks at the site, looks at some of the zoning and the land development issues that might occur, and advises us on that as a team member. And also we invite mechanical and electrical engineers that look at infrastructure, what's existing, what would happen if we, let's say in a new building, what type of systems might be encouraged to be efficient in terms of energy and so forth. So we put that team together, but that's just the first step. The next step, which is really important, comes from our office's thinking that we want to engage the users, the stakeholders, into the process. It's really important because we have ideas. Lord knows we have probably too many ideas. And what we really need to find out is, what are your ideas? What do you think about what you're doing? What is your program? What are the positive things that are going on that's causing this feasibility study to be generated? What are the negative things that aren't working? And we put in balance and we talk about those things. So what we do is we conduct what we call a workshop. Some of us in the fancy architectural world call it a charrette. And what we do is we'll go into a space where everyone can be in the same room, and we put a lot of paper on the wall. And we use magic markers and all kinds of stickies and things to kind of generate what are we doing? Why are we here? What's the purpose of all this? Are there things that we really need to pull out from everyone so that we have a nice palette of information that we can put together as a team, a design team, to offer alternatives or suggestions that will take you to the next step. I have found that to be very useful tool, whether you're dealing with a fire company where it has all these members that have different ideas, or churches, schools. We do a lot of work at the university with feasibility studies, committees. We kind of synthesize their ideas so that they then start to understand where they're coming from. So what we end up doing is studying, in most cases, the land, the survey, the site. What site components are going to influence the design in terms of difficulty, zoning, cost. What are we going to run into with site analysis, utilities, things like that. Then we look at the building, we look at the function. Are there structural issues? What's the essence of the space? This space has a real strong design emphasis. And when I first walked in here, walked through that door and saw this, I just absolutely was stunned by the strength and the purpose of what's here. So if you're planning on renovating and working, you have to keep the spirit of this constant in your minds as to what these spaces evoke. Mechanical and electrical systems become interesting discussions. So we go into all those that I mentioned. Sometimes we have to suggest, or because of the cost, we might suggest phasing. What can we do now that we can maybe take the next step, and then what's the next step? Because it's all based on another component of the feasibility study, and that is a very preliminary cost estimate. I believe heavily in that at the very early part, because we need to understand the total project costs, which are based on construction, but also what's the architectural fee? What are the zoning permitting fees? What are all the monies, the moving expenses, all those things we put in order so that you have some idea of what the cost will be to achieve what we're coming up with. And the purpose of the feasibility study is to bring that cost down into your eyes immediately, so that you can look at your funding streams and find out, is this really over and above what we can afford? Or are there other alternatives that maybe will allow us to do it in a more phased way? Sometimes when we do a feasibility study, there's a tremendous reaction to the cost estimate. I don't like to wait until we've gone further down the road to all of a sudden talk about costs. I think costs have to be brought out immediately because it's a cost benefit, and we really need to know whether we have to reduce the program a little bit or we can have to go for monies that have to come from a different source to generate enough. So in essence, the feasibility study, although it's an outlay of money, allows you to understand and know the issues because you're part of the process, and you then can make decisions as to whether you want to go ahead. Now, going ahead is more of an understandable process. In other words, if we're given permission to go beyond the feasibility study, we then go into further design to make that design more mature. Again, doing cost estimates, meeting with you, going over all the options and why and so forth. And once we have approval for that, then we do the documentation that's required to get the project constructed through bidding, awarding contracts, working with contractors, going through the whole thing. And then, of course, we monitor the construction all the way through to substantial completion so that the product that you get is what the intention is for the design documents. And so our office, when you hire me as your design professional, I don't hand it off, I go right through to the very end, making sure that the construction's proper. So, but we're at the very beginning now, we're at that feasibility component. And it's a commitment in terms of finance, but more importantly, it's a commitment for you to engage in the process. We want you to engage. We need you to engage. So that's kind of the overall.
Thank you.
It's so interesting to be in a church where people are standing, and this is so new to me, and it's really interesting. I love this environment. It's very nice. Well, I have to tell you, and I do this with all, I don't want you to get the wrong idea, but when I did Good Shepherd Church, Father Bender was the pastor at the church, and I had been away from the church for a long time. And so when I got approved to do the feasibility study and to go ahead with the design, I said, I got to go to church. I need to go and see how it works, how it feels. I ended up joining. Now, I don't plan to do that, although it's encouraging. But it got me to get back to where I should be. So thank you for listening. Are there any questions? Is there anything that
Yeah, please feel free if anybody has any questions for him while we have him here.
I mean, the next event for me is go to Watson's and buy some tomatoes and corn, so I'm available.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Somebody has a question.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Has the COVID situation changed any of your thinking, plans, procedures, or anything, whether it's short-term or long-term?
Well, as far as procedures for a feasibility study, no. Obviously, we have to be cautious of distancing and the environment. You know, some people are applying here by Zoom. I would think that if we did a workshop, we also would have Zoom available for people that didn't feel comfortable, let's say, attending. But the same methodology and process for the feasibility study doesn't change, nor does the process of going beyond that through design and construction. Now, construction has changed in the sense that now we're a lot more strict on developing specifications for safety of the workers, meeting guidelines for testing and all that. And that's changed somewhat the construction end of the process. And quite frankly, some of those things that we've learned are going to probably go after this starts to calm down a little bit. So, as far as the construction and the design, the design, I haven't noticed it changing. Over the last 4 or 5 years, in terms of offices, we've gone into more of an open plan, less offices and more open spaces for interaction and collaboration. And we built a lot of projects like that, and now we're kind of going, whoops, you know, is that really working? Well, I think it will, I think it is, but there are modifications that are going on because of that. So, I'm not sure I answered totally your question, but...
You did.
Okay.
Do we have another?
By the way, when we do a workshop, it's very informal. I mean, It has to be. It has to be that people feel comfortable raising their hand and saying, you know, this might be a stupid question, which there never is, and talking. And so that's why we do a lot of writing, a lot of stickies, and a lot of putting stuff on the wall. After we do that, we take photographs of it and then put it up in their office so that we then become, the design team can always keep alert on what was discussed. So.
All right. Well, thank you once again.
You're welcome. You're welcome.